So, Michael, to you first. Jim Chalmers says he's going to remake capitalism. What the hay is he talking about?
Why are we so lucky, mate, that we've got an intellectual genius like Jim out there going to redesign 400 years worth of economic theory? By the way, I hear you say Peter's going to Alice Springs, or is in Alice Springs, Peter Credlin. She's got no hope of bumping into Albo up there, mate. He's at the tennis tonight. Yeah. Do you know he's at the tennis for the third night in a row? He spent 10 hours at the tennis and 4 hours in Alice Springs. Anyway, just saying.
Very good point.
So what Jim's going to do, Jim's written, talking about FIFO, fly in, fly out, and these people had the gall to criticise Scott Morrison. Mate, Jim's an intellectual genius who's going to overturn 400 years of economic theory and practice by having cuddly capitalism, whatever you want to call it, partnerships between government and the private sector. He's lucky that the big business community in Australia have never been weaker than they are now, and I've never seen them so weak and woke. So he'll be able to get most of them on side pretty easily because they collapse at the first sign of grape shot, and they've got very little influence these days. I mean, the way the government got through its IR legislation, the caps on gas pricing, etc., they can just walk over the business community. But basically, Jim wants to have more intervention in the market. This is an old economic theory. It's a demand side intervention. And if you look at the Financial Review, have written a great editorial tonight. If you have a look at it, they remind us of three great interventions of the Labor Party in the last 10 or so years. The first of all was the NBN, where we've just written off $31 billion worth of the taxpayers' money. The second is the NDIS, another great social reform, which is fantastic for the country. But again, it was meant to be self-funding, and at the end of the decade, it's going to cost us $90 billion a year. And the third were the Gonski reforms, which are going to cost $300 billion by the end of the decade. They're $30 billion a year, with no discernible increase in educational outcomes. So, these things are great. The Labor Party, great in theory and hopeless in practice. Apart from Hawke and Keating, who had strict economic understanding, this bloke's in la-la land, and this is all going to come crashing down on the Australian taxpayer. I don't think Jim Chalmers has got any idea what he's doing. So hang on to your hats. This bloke's, now decided not to be a commentator. He's going to intervene. And this is going to be a disaster for Australia, because if the one thing you can't rely on the Labor Party for law and order, to wit, the Northern Territory, and you certainly can't rely on them for any economic management, mate.
Keith, in generations from now, will we be learning about Gymnomics?
Oh, I thought Albonomics was bad, but now you've got Jimbonomics. I mean, the people at Oxford and Cambridge and MIT and everywhere else, get out your textbooks and set them on fire, because they're all wrong. Mr Chalmers is in town, a bloke who's never run a business, who's never been actually employed by anyone other than the union and the taxpayer, who's never had to pay wages, put his own hard-earned on the table. He's now going to rewrite capitalism. I mean, this is just, it is incredible. I don't remember seeing this anywhere during the election campaign. And we now have a concept being put forward, and I'll sort of pull it right down. You don't need to read the 6,000-word treatise. What he's going to do, he's going to take wealth from the people who have earned it to give to people that want it. It is socialism 101. It is bad for our country. It's bad for the economy. And I can't believe that the business community would let him get away with it.
Rose, values-based capitalism, is this the government version of the ESG movement that's been moving around through the stock market for the past 5 years?
I think it's great that we have a treasurer who has ideas and is prepared to actually put some pen to paper and put it out there and, defend his record, put some stuff on the table. I mean, I feel like the last treasurer was pretty thoughtful as well, and maybe if they'd listened to him a bit more, the last government wouldn't have gotten so much strife. But I love, actually, that we have politicians who have ideas and are prepared to take a little bit of time exploring them, as opposed to just sound bites and headlines. Actually sit down and think and write and have a discussion and a debate. I mean, I do think that our economic system isn't working so great right now. I think wages are flat, inflation's high. I think we're an increasingly unequal society. And if Jim is attempting to have a thoughtful approach to that and lay it all out there, there's no secrets here. He's setting out his agenda, and it's a democracy. We'll have a couple of years to test out his ideas. And if people don't like him, absolutely there'll be an opportunity for them to do something about it. But
coming from
Rose, why would
Michael,
would we think Jim Chalmers? Why would we think Jimmy Chalmers would have any idea what he's doing? As Keith said, this bloke's never had a job in the private sector. Albo's never had a job in the private sector. Most of the cabinet have never had a job in the private sector. They've never invested their own money. They've never taken risk. How do you evaluate risk in an economic sense if you've never run a business? All those farmers and small business people, tens of thousands of them watching tonight that understand risk, right? Mortgaging your house, getting a loan, getting paid, keeping your business afloat, understanding economic risk. Jim's never had a job.
I mean, he does have a PhD.
Where he's risked a single dollar.
So...
What?
In Paul Keating.
In academia.
He's got a
That's
doctorate
the problem.
in Paul Keating.
But what about
he's got a doctorate in Paul Keating. But I'll tell you what, Paul Keating would read that thing tomorrow, and he'd be choking on a French clock. He'd read that nonsense tomorrow, and he'd think my PhD student has gone nuts.
Well, he can get on the phone and tell Dominic Perrottet what to do, because he's also putting it into practice right now with some of this buy now, pay later tax stuff that's around.